Yeah, he lives in her little house.
Yeah.
The little car.
The little car in the little house. Yeah, he has a little car in the little house. Yeah, Teddy Roosevelt started the national parks.
But why?
Well,
yeah, there's some weird stuff going on in the national forest. So, I mean, I think personally, either it's aliens abducting people, or it's a hollow earth, wendigos and whatnot living down. That's the word. Wendigo. Yeah.
Here's where the cracks in that theory come in.
There's no cracks. Okay.
Oh, here we go. Beep, boop, boop. A California Christmas.
Oh, yeah, I've seen that one. And there's a second, too.
No, this is not it. It's got the same dude in it, though.
Well,
it is called Holiday in the Vineyards. You have not watched it yet.
Holiday in the Vineyards?
So, basically, this dude...
Yeah.
It's a good one. By the way, should we communicate that we now enjoy a good Hallmark Christmas movie?
There's
nothing wrong with that.
I'm not afraid to admit it.
There's nothing wrong with that.
No.
So, Christmas in the Vineyard is this super big shot company owned like wine company, like one of the giant ones supposedly, but I've never heard of them before, so it's got to be fake, obviously. They own all these vineyards in like Napa, and then the son is like a bum.
I watched this.
You watched it already?
Oh yeah, of course.
Where he ends up getting with like the Mexican chick?
Yeah, he lives in her little house.
Yeah.
The little car.
The little car in the little house. Yeah, he has a little car in the little house. So, then he ends up getting with the Spaniard.
Yes, yeah.
And she kind of looks like Salma Hayek mixed with
another.
Yeah, who's the one from Four Brothers? That's the only movie I can think of that she's in.
Oh, Sofia Vergara.
Yeah. So and then he ends up getting. So I only watched half of it last night. I'm gonna watch the other half. Emily fell asleep 10 minutes.
I mean, you know how it's gonna end. Because they all end the same.
Well, obviously.
So
Emily always starts out telling me the same thing because she picks the movies. Oh, let's watch that one. You'll like that. And I'm like, I'm not going to like that. But then what ends up happening is she falls asleep 10 minutes in, and I just get locked in.
And then you like it. Yeah.
Well, I get locked in, and I'm committed to it, and I want to watch it.
The reason why I like Hallmark movies is because you know exactly what's going to happen from beginning to end. It's so easy to see the plot line, but it's the best like background filler movie ever because you don't have to really watch it to know what's going on.
Well, you can, you 100% know who's gonna fall in love with who, and then they sprinkle in every once in a while like the parents falling in love with the other parents because they're widowed and this and that and the other thing. That's my only big gripe with the predictability of Hallmark is every once in a while I want another plot line, another story inside of the movie sprinkled in, not just the main one.
Yeah.
So like what I like about this other Becky movie is like the lady's husband died. Mm-hmm. And not only is the guy and the girl like falling in love, but he's also like assuming the role of dad to the kids.
Yeah.
So I kind of like that extra little thing. They sprinkle all that stuff in there with like the skateboarding and then the snowboarding and teaching them. And then there's the whole other guy, the black dude that's making wine in his garage. And, apparently it's really good. So like there's a few other little things that are sprinkled in that keep it interesting where you're not only thinking about what it's going to be like, you know?
Exactly.
And that's about it. So Red Grouper opens to transition into the fishing thing.
It does.
Red Grouper opens January 1st.
Mm-hmm.
What else is open? You're kind of the quintessential offshore expert here.
So
what else is open?
Unfortunately, the stereotypical offshore species that everyone knows and loves, gag grouper, it's going to be closed. It's going to be closed probably for a while until typically it opens up June 1st. Don't know if they're going to do that, to be entirely honest.
You don't think they'll move it up since they closed it early? Maybe move it up to May?
I don't know. I don't think so. They might. Who knows?
Did they ever, did you research in why did they close it, so early?
No. I mean, for me, it's really not worth it to research why they closed it. I mean, they always say because FWC and NOAA took numbers and from the...
But they
research
take them from
boats.
Yeah, define research boats. Is it research boats, or are they talking to commercial fishermen and monitoring catches?
So that's the thing is a commercial fisherman, or really anybody, I believe, can become a research vessel and give the numbers to
You gotta go to the dark
FWC
side.
and know. Yeah, exactly. So anybody could really do it, and you could give them a crazy number. I've been told by captains that they have to write down whatever number you give them. So if you say that you caught 1 million red snapper, well, then they have to write that down. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's another reason why I think that things are skewed with that. But of course, red snappers close because that's only like for a short time around here. Gag groupers close, so red grouper is going to be the one that people are going to be excited about to go out and fish. Of course, hogfish are open. Mangrove snapper open, and then there's a lot of other species out there that you can catch that I think that, and then we're going to talk about that that people typically don't think of, but are really good. So
that's kind of the beauty about offshore fishing versus, let's say, inshore targeting snook or redfish. Trout, you can kind of mix in some of it, and a lot of spots that trout are, you might sprinkle in a redfish occasionally, but it's pretty expected of what you're going to find depending on where you're at. So, I mean, there's very few spots where you can go and catch all three sitting in the same spot. The thing about offshore that I love is there's so much variety on one spot. You can literally catch 20 plus species on one spot. And the other part I like about it is they're pretty much all edible.
Yeah, for the most part,
I mean, I think we agree on this. Taste and versatility wise, what's like our favorite fish?
Well, this is going to be probably a hot take. It's grunts. I mean, I love to eat. If you can catch some solid, big gray grunts, there's different grunts out there. There's I think they call them the Key West grunts, which are different. They're
I thought
smaller.
gray grunts and Key West grunts were the same.
I've been told
they're the gray with the orange mouth, or are those just gray grunts?
No, a Key West grunt is smaller and it has more color to it, but I think people call gray grunts Key West, Key West snappers or Key West grunts. But no, a big gray grunt. If you turn that into a fish taco, it's the best.
Oh yeah,
I mean, there's no doubt about it.
It tastes like any other. It tastes like hogfish, really. I mean, it tastes like hogfish. It tastes like mangrove. It tastes like schoolmaster, dog. It tastes like not dogs, but dog snapper.
Yeah,
but that's my overall my favorite eating fish. Like grouper's good. I like it. Do I think it's overrated slightly? Yeah, I do. But if you're gonna come here and you're gonna go, if you're coming here on vacation, go get a grouper sandwich somewhere. And there's some real Tides in downtown. Best grouper sandwich I've ever had in my life.
That place is great.
So I like grouper, but I would choose snapper over grouper any day.
I would agree too, because sometimes grouper fillets are too thick, and I don't like when fish fillets are too thick, and they can get kind of buttery and weird sometimes. I don't like that.
Too rich almost.
Yeah, I don't like Chilean sea bass because it's too buttery and weird to me. But a snapper fillet is always thinner. It's flaky. It tastes good. It's clean. It's awesome.
Yeah, I love snapper. Those are my favorite.
Yeah. But let's go back to red grouper. Because that's kind of where when we talked before this, how we're starting out. Tactics in terms of red grouper. What do you typically do? What do you see? Because I think we have kind of the same ideas. I might have a little bit more experience offshore fishing, but you do too. I mean, you have plenty and you know a lot. So what normally are you going after when it comes to red grouper?
So I'm good enough to read a chart plotter and a sonar to look for the type of bottom that I would guess red grouper would be there. Now, generally when I've grouper fished per se, and I wouldn't just say I've gone out and targeted specifically red grouper. Generally, anywhere you find in any spot that's marked, and again, you bought a bunch of numbers from a guy. The guys that I've fished with, and just in talking, share numbers a lot of times. But you can also find them on Facebook Marketplace or whatever. You can buy numbers from retired commercial fishermen, or guys will just sell their numbers. So you can buy thousands and thousands and thousands of numbers, and then you just go exploring, which is what I love. So, but also half of the time, if you have a really good transducer setup that you can pick up bottom while you're running on plane, you don't have to stop and just troll around, you can see a lot of those spots. So when we were in our offshore kind of season of life, when my dad had the big boat, we would stop on spots that we would just run over that we had no idea anything was there, and we had a good transducer setup on that. So we would see a lot of different. Basically, the first thing I'm looking for in that situation is just a change. Mm-hmm. So a lot of it is just you can kind of read the sand, and then the more you do it, you can kind of read like, oh, that looks weird. We just hit a wave, so it's going to look different. The bottom's going to look different. So you can kind of start to read a graph a little bit better the more you're at it, obviously, because at first it's definitely confusing trying to read and decipher what's what.
Yeah.
But basically, that's the first thing. It's just looking for any kind of change in the bottom, and then rolling over it and kind of, run over it a few times, do some circles around and see what else is in the area. And a lot of times these rocks are no bigger than rock piles or coral heads or Swiss cheese, whatever you want to call it. That type of bottom, or a ledge, is small. They're no bigger than a lot of these spots, and a lot of these numbers like we hit a couple weeks ago when we were out. It's all small areas, and you get like one drop at it, and then you got to go drift back over it.
Yeah.
So a lot of them are real small. You got to hit the spot. But that being said, so kind of back to my earlier point about when I would do a lot of offshore fishing with some other guys. Yeah. We would never really particularly target red grouper. Like the one guy I fished with, Alan, we would if they were in season, we would hit them like usually on the way back in, because usually with Alan we would go way out 60 plus miles, amberjack, red snapper, do that kind of thing, and then stop on the way in and hit grouper on the way in.
Yeah.
But we would never really target red grouper. We would stop and try and catch blacks or gags, and generally the first you would have to work through the red grouper to get to the other fish, which is kind of nice, because that tells me that red grouper are kind of dumb, and I've heard that before, that they're much more curious than they are scared per se, or skittish like a black or a gag is. So yeah, I'm really just looking for the change in the bottom. Rocks, that Swiss cheese, ledges, something that sticks out to me in basically a desert. Because if you kind of think about the bottom of the ocean floor, it's kind of a desert when you get out there, and anything that has some kind of change, some kind of life around it will attract the bait, will attract the fish. Ledges, especially for grouper, areas to hide, areas for them to get on, not just sit on, but get into and sneak around, which again presents the fun of grouper fishing, is digging them out of those areas. So, but that's 30,000 foot view. That's what I'm looking for. Changes in the bottom, and then can I get scientific enough to tell you exactly what's on the bottom? No, unless it's like a car and I can see that it's a car, or something. But like, I can't really tell the difference between a lot of stuff except for hard bottom and soft bottom. So the hard bottom tells me it's kind of Swiss cheesy. The soft bottom just tells me it's just sand. Yeah,
for sure. No, and I agree with you for sure. I've gotten a little bit more, I guess you could say, experience where I can see, like the color changes. So typically, hard bottom is a darker orange, a yellow, a red, and I've even seen purple on readings. And purple means like literally like this is
impenetrable
granite. I mean, it's like the hardest thing known to man, which is interesting. You don't see that a lot. You see it out in the middle grounds. But yeah, normally with red grouper, I like to start at least 65 feet. Because normally, for sure. I haven't caught many keepers in less than that. 65 feet is typically where I start to get, the 20 plus inches, because 20 inches, that's a big red grouper for sure, and that's the keeper right now.
20, wait, how big did you say? 20? 20?
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of small.
Yes, but no. When you like actually see what a 20-inch fish looks like, I think they're pretty big.
They also probably have a 20-inch girth on them all the way around.
Yeah, they're freaking footballs.
Full circumference.
Yeah, they're beasts. And we've caught some bigger, like 30-inch ones, and they're giants. Yeah. The only thing about red grouper I will say is that it's not my favorite grouper. I've had more worms in red grouper than any other one, which is interesting.
You think it's the shallower water?
I don't know.
See, it's funny you talk about starting in like 60, 65 feet. I've caught plenty of, and again, they're mostly small. Yeah. But everything that I've heard from guys that have done this for a long time tell me the same thing, which is if you're catching small red grouper, there are large red grouper there.
Typically,
and you generally just have to work through. You're going to catch a lot of small ones. Yeah. So let's say you catch 5 small ones per every keeper, basically, and you're just going to weed through those. Yeah. So I've caught them in 15 feet, 20 feet, 25 feet. Yeah, and I've caught them deep too. Yeah. But it's kind of funny you say that you usually
I've caught them in shallower water too, but normally the consistently bigger ones are in deeper water.
Well, that I would agree with, yeah.
One thing, too, I will say with the Swiss cheese, I would say that I've had more luck on Swiss cheese bottom than ledges with them. Okay. And the way that I like to read Swiss cheese is it actually typically looks pretty flat, but it's that deeper red, Yeah. And one thing I like to tell people, too, is when you're running, it's easier to see the bottom in Florida running north to south and east to west. Just the way that the state's set up and the way that, like, the bottom looks. Yeah. whatever reason, most of us run east to west because that's what we're doing. We're going out or coming in.
Right.
Switch it up, you can see it a lot easier. So that's normally if I'm trying to find new spots or trying to get a better angle on something, I can change my direction.
So if you're heading out of, you guys keep the boat there in Ozona.
Yep.
So you would either run north or south, or like a northwest or a southwest.
Try
type
to,
track,
yes. Yep.
So that you're mixing it up a little
or
bit.
what I'll do is
that's a good tip.
when I get to the spot, I change my direction. Okay. I put the trolling motor down and I do circles. I mean, when we were offshore, like I do circles for 5 to 10 minutes.
Well, yeah, and that's the other thing too that I like about your style is just because you run over the spot, it takes a while for that boat to slow down.
Yeah.
So go find the spot, but also explore the areas within a football field, in area around that spot, because chances are, if you're going to an X that's on your chart plotter, more times than not, the exactly where that X is not going to be where that spot is. That X is representing really an area, and you're looking for something inside of that area. But there may be things 10 feet, 20 feet, 30 feet off of that spot that are just as good or surrounding that whole area. It's your X-ray vision of the bottom, but you have to do your due diligence. So in essence, not just pulling up to the spot and dropping immediately. It's like pulling up, finding it, make sure your drift or your anchor, your anchoring is good. Make sure you're on where you want to be. And especially if the current's moving, I like to chum. I like to put a chum block out, maybe cut some sardines and drop them down. Let that stuff soak for a while. And let everything kind of, come to life underneath you before, because you're rolling up and changing everything. So if you can get a feeding frenzy going and work your way through some of that, take your time, do your due diligence, I think is what I appreciate about your offshore stuff.
And that's the way to do it. I hate when when I fish with people, and when I say people, normally, my parents are a little bit impatient, and they like to just immediately drop. They're like children out there, which I understand. Like, they don't get to fish that much, so they are like really excited. Yeah. But I'm like, hold up, let's wait. Yeah. Let's see what it looks like. If it's not
the sabiki.
Yeah, exactly. Get the sabiki going. But if it doesn't look like I want it to, we're gonna move. Right. We're gonna change 10, 15 feet to the left or the right, because again, like you said, that spot that you marked isn't the spot. It's never accurate. It's normally 60 feet off or something like that. So you got to do some circles and find that spot. But normally when I get there, I like to look at the bottom, see what's going on, and then typically, and I guess we can kind of move to the next point of actually fishing, if I'm not catching the target species in 5 to 10 minutes, I'm bumping it. I'm moving a little bit.
What if you're catching small ones? So to my point about red grouper, with if they're small ones, there's big ones generally. If you're catching, is there a size limit that you're kind of looking for? Hey, if they're 10 inches, I'm out. If they're 15 to 17, I'm staying and working through them. What's your thoughts on that?
If I'm catching grouper, I'm staying. Okay. The only time I leave a spot, and I was told by some old fishy dude, if you catch sea bass or lizard fish, immediately move.
Why sea bass?
I
like to eat sea bass.
I know.
Too.
I don't know.
Plus they're good shark bait.
I don't know why, but
I can't tell you.
They
are.
Me that. Yeah.
Pat told me that.
Yeah, Pat. Yeah. I don't know why, but all of my experience with it is if you are grouper fishing and you pull up to a spot and you catch sea bass and lizard fish, there are no grouper. If you're catching grunts, stay. The grunts are what those fish are feeding on. They're not eating sea bass.
Okay.
So
I didn't know that.
And every time I've done that, it's worked, because I've sat in a spot for 10 or 15 minutes ripping up sea bass over and over and over again. Yeah. And you can actually see them on the mark too. You'll see a greenish blue, kind of wave on the bottom. That's sea bass. They're just, it's like a blanket of fish. It's weird.
That's another thing about one thing I've always struggled with about a chart plotter and reading it. Anybody can see bait.
Yeah.
Or something suspended in the water column. You can tell, when there's a lot of times, especially when you're further offshore. Another thing that I would say that we both agree on and both do pretty religiously is put a flat line out immediately.
Yeah, for sure.
Immediately. Yeah. A big pinfish, a big white bait, a big sardine, something like that. Doesn't have to be a stinger, but probably preferred, because there's always kingfish here.
Unless you're targeting tuna, then I wouldn't.
Yeah, so something along those lines. But so flat line immediately. But then once I'm reading, can you see fish on the bottom can you pick that? I'm just not good at that stuff.
Yes, so that's where the color comes in.
Yeah, I was going to say, does the color change? Because
yes.
I know the bait is like generally green and blue.
Yes.
That's easy to pick out.
Yep.
You can see it on the bottom. You can see it in the water column, all over the place.
If you're seeing a green to blue haze on the bottom, typically it's either like a light grass. Sometimes we get that like gunk on gunk down there. That's what it is, or it's bait. The only time where it's not is where you're seeing those arcs, those strips of like big clouds of like an orangish yellow. That's normally snapper.
Yeah.
That's normally grouper, stuff like that. So if you see those strips in the middle of the water column, that's a big pelagic, you know. That's a
kingfish.
That's a kingfish, wahoo, sailfish, AJ,
even a cooter or something.
Something like that. That's normally what that is. Okay. But if it's a lighter color, it's bait. So if I'm seeing that type of activity, I'm like, okay, I know that like this is a good spot, and like we need to stay here. Yeah. So what do you think about? And we can kind of move, since we already kind of segued into the fish that we're seeing.
Yeah.
What kind of bait? What kind of rigs are you using for red grouper?
I kind of back to a couple videos ago when we were talking about inshore setups and leader. I kind of hold the same thing to be true offshore. I like a smaller hook, and I like a lighter leader at first. Yeah. So what I mean is, again, pulling up to a spot, my goal is to hook, like we said, kind of the target species. Yeah. So 4/0, 5/0 circle, must add demon, something with a thicker, definitely a thicker wired hook, not a fine wire, not an inshore circle, certainly. Something heavier, even a cutting point, something like that. That's thicker wire. But again, you generally use what, 6/0? I
use the trocars, but they're a little smaller, but they're sharper. That's why.
So I like a little bit smaller hook. I'll probably start with 30. I don't see a huge difference, and again, maybe this is ignorance talking, between mono and fluoro out there. Generally, I'll do mono. Yeah. I don't see it as a huge,
I think it's a mind game
difference
out offshore
to me personally. So I'll start a little lighter, 30 pound, bump it up to 40, 50 if I need to. But generally you're not going to pull up and catch the biggest fish on the reef or on that spot the first drop. So that being said, you start getting rocked up and you start getting broken off and whatever else, then bump it up. Hook size to me though is still, it's kind of irrelevant, as long as it's big enough. But I always err on the side of big enough, not too big. So I always want to make sure that fish can get A, the entire bait, and B, the entire hook. Sight wise, I don't think it nearly matters nearly as much grouper fishing as it does snapper fishing with hook size, or even like yellowtail. Like mangroves don't care. You can, as long as they can get it in their mouth, it's going in their mouth.
Yeah, for sure.
So, but still, that's usually a smaller J hook anyway. So yeah, I like to keep it lighter generally. That's just my preference.
No, I'm on the same way. I mean, like we've talked about this before, is I use 40-pound fluoro, and that's it, really, offshore. I'll bump it up maybe to 50 or 60 if I'm breaking off. Normally you don't, though. And using, for red grouper, a typical, other than slow pitch, I'm using my 12 or 16 Talica. Yeah. And it's simple. I like fish finder rigs as opposed to knocker rigs, because it lets that bait move around.
So that's another question. So live bait is easy. I think it's easy to cover. It's easy for the most part offshore. It's easy to get. You can sabiki about whatever you need to. Yeah. You can set pinfish traps out a couple of weeks before. You can stop at the bait shop and buy a couple dozen shrimp, pinfish, things like that, and mix it up. Frozen bait as well, squid. It all works really well. You can. I've caught big groupers on whole squids before, whole frozen squids. And of course snappers on the chunk. So again, that's the easy part.
Yeah.
What about artificial?
Yeah.
Because you're a big jig guy.
I am, for sure. I'm going to go back and then I'll go to the jig. So I think it is very easy, but I think there is a science to how you use frozen and live bait. Okay. Whenever I've ever gone offshore, and this is another thing that an old salty commercial guy told me, you always start with frozen bait. So I really like whole squid for red grouper. Red grouper crush squid. They love it. I like sardines, frozen sardines for red grouper. Typically for most of my frozen bait, that's what I'm using. Yeah. Always start off with frozen bait, because for whatever reason, they typically tend to get turned on to frozen bait the first drop rather than the second. Okay. The other reason why too is that frozen bait is going to disintegrate a little bit. Yeah. On the bottom, as those smaller bait are chewing it up. Yeah, it gives that it's creating a chum on the bottom, which is important. Normally what happens is you're going to catch some solid fish on that frozen, and then the bite's going to shut off like that. Then you switch over to live bait, and it picks up right again with pinfish. And I've always done that, and it's worked for me. And I've caught more fish doing that than anything else.
So it's kind of funny to your point about that frozen bait breaking up, and your whole thought about chumming the bottom. Mm-hmm. So my father-in-law loves to fish, does not fish as much as he is. He's a busy man. But when he does fish a few times a year, it's only offshore. That's what he loves to do. And so he will go out. There's a few guys from church that he fishes with. One guy's commercial. One guy's one of the same guys I fish with, Alan. All great fishermen, know what they're doing. But the one commercial guy that he goes out with, generally there's only a few of them on the boat, so I don't know if this rule really applies. But he told me this actually learned from Kurt, believe it or not, about fishing. So
Kurt knows what he's talking about.
Well, with offshore, he definitely does. But he taught me this when we were fishing with Alan, because when we would fish on Alan's boat, there was generally a lot of people. So 32 Boston Whaler, there'd be 10 people on the boat.
That's a meat fest.
So it was a meat fest, but everybody knew what they were doing.
Yeah.
So it was generally scot-free. It was fine. Everything, a couple tangles here and there, but that happens even when there's two people on the boat.
Yeah,
you can't predict what a fish is going to do.
Yeah.
But Kurt would always, he wouldn't get up when we'd pull up to the spot. Everybody's excited to get down there. Kurt would just sit. And he wouldn't fish for 5 or 10, 15 minutes sometimes. And then he would get his rod.
Yeah.
Kurt always used live bait.
Yeah.
So it's kind of to your point.
Yep.
Always live pinfish, a live grunt, really anything that we had, a blue runner, anything that we had in the well. Kurt would always drop the biggest live bait that he could get. Kurt would drop. And he didn't get hit like immediately every time, but Kurt would usually get the biggest fish of the trip.
Yeah.
And I kind of always chalked it up to dumb luck, or if my mother-in-law was with us, again, loves to offshore fish, knows what she's doing out on the water. He would always, chalk it up to, Danita's got the favor, so she's always good luck when she's on the boat. But he told me that the reason he doesn't jump up and go right away is, he goes, I'm letting the feeding frenzy get going underwater. There's 6 or 7 lines out that have squid, that have sardines, whatever the case may be, because those fish are getting all fired up down there. And he says, I'm going to catch them once they're fired up. I'm not going to do the firing up and have to rebait every time. He drops one bait, he catches a fish.
Yeah, no, I mean, he's literally letting those people chum for him, really.
Exactly.
Is what it comes
That's
down
exactly
to.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah. What's going to happen during that chum is you're going to catch the species that you don't want to catch, the byfish, the bycatch, grunts. If you catch some smaller grunts, of course, keep them if they're bigger. If they're smaller, cut those suckers up and use those as bait.
Can you use them whole?
I have, yes. I've used ones that are probably, like
6, 7, 8 inches.
Yeah, 6 inches, and I've caught giants on them.
Because there's no keeper limit, size limit on
there's
grunts,
not.
Which that's important. Yeah. We're not using illegal fish as bait.
We're not, no. But if you're running out of bait, like say you're like getting low on like frozen and live bait, drop a sabiki down, drop some smaller shrimp or something, and catch your bait. And that's another good way to catch red grouper and gag grouper too, if you wanted to.
And one thing I've noticed too, as far as bait offshore versus inshore, it's generally not a net offshore. You're not throwing a cast net.
No, I've tried it. It doesn't work.
It's too tough. It's too deep of water. But generally, when you pull up to a spot and you start getting that chum slick going, chances are there's going to be a lot of blue runners that come into the area, cigar minnows, things along those lines, that when you pull up to a healthy bottom spot, coral, something that's alive, again, it's like the bottom's a desert, kind of like what we talked about.
They're seeking that.
They're finding those areas of cover, of food. Everything's attracted to that. Yeah. So chances are you can catch your bait and catch all your fish all in the same spot. Sure. So definitely having a sabiki.
Works for sure.
Yeah.
The other thing is artificials. So a lot of people, and this is for the U.S., using artificials offshore is a new idea. Overseas in Japan, they've been doing it forever, and that's where it comes. Japan, number one.
Hot to search.
It's hot to search.
Steady hand.
Slow pitch and vertical jigs have blown up in this area. The reason why is because it freaking works.
Yeah.
I've outfished people with slow pitch that are using live bait and frozen bait. It is incredible, especially for red grouper.
I want to talk about a misconception that I believed for a while about jigging, specifically in the Gulf of Mexico. This is a shallow water fishery, even offshore. Okay, you got to go way out. They judge it. It's basically a mile a foot or a foot a mile.
Yeah,
roughly. It's basically how it starts. Now, of course, there's differences. The further south you go, generally, the deeper it gets. The further north you go, the shallower it is. Generally.
Yeah.
My thought, and I think this is a misconception, especially slow pitch because of the style of fishing that it is, that it's not deep enough here to do that. That's something for the other coast. That's something for the Keys. I've had really good success slow pitch and regular jigging in the Keys. Deep water, 400, 600, 800 feet of water. Fish, and again, not dropping that jig all the way down to the bottom, but flutter jigs and stuff. Mid water column tuna fishing, blackfin, even yellowfin. And just those different pelagics that are constantly even wahoo, mixing in with that. I've had great success doing it, but my thoughts has always been it's just not deep enough here to be successful jigging. You have a completely different mindset. That being said, I've never put the time in out here to do it. You have.
And that's where it is definitely like a lot again, and we're seeing it in the shop. We're seeing, these micro jigs that are 20 grams, 12 grams, that they're this
they're
big.
Only that big,
And there's guys that I was in 15 foot of water and I caught,
I remember that guy that came
like
in
crazy
he came
amount.
in and bought the rest of the 20
he bought all of them. They work. And normally I don't have as much experience doing it in super shallow water, but normally my depth is 40 foot plus.
Okay.
And I'm using 40 to 60 gram jigs around there, and I'll bump it up, of course. But that is something where I am like hitting a spot, and immediately my first drop is with the jig.
What setup do you use? Because I think that's another misconception that you have to have the perfect rod and the perfect reel that's completely designed. While that makes it easier, do you think that's a misconception?
I do. Do I think that doing it not correct but better with a slow pitch setup, it works better? Yeah, I do. Yes, but if you have a 5,000 or 6,000 size spinning reel and a beefier rod, you all right over there?
There's a freaking drone flying around in here.
They're listening to us. Yeah, but if you have a setup like that, you can do it pretty well and use jigs. With
shorter rod generally.
Yeah, normally like a 6'6", 6 foot.
What about the tip? I know backbone. You got to have backbone. But do you need a little softer tip on it?
A little bit, yeah. A little softer tip, typically, yes, you do. With a conventional, using a bigger Talica or it's a little harder. I will say that.
Like dropping setup per se, like where you're going to drop a bait to the bottom with a 4 or 5 ounce lead.
Yeah, can you do it? Of course you can.
Right.
It's not going to be the best, and it's going to beat you up. That's where having because you're going to have to work the jig. I mean, you have to put some time into it, and actually move that bait. So that's where using a slow pitch setup is better because it's lighter. I mean, I have a Trivala, which is it's a 6'3" medium heavy, so it's a lighter rod. I mean, it weighs nothing.
Right.
And I use a Tranx. I use a smaller Tranx.
Yep.
I use
what size? A 200 or 300?
No, it's a 300.
Okay.
I have like the big ball handle on it. And the nice thing about that is it has a line. It's got it's got a line. Level line on it. So that is nice. You don't need it, but it's nice. I use 30-pound fluoro.
Yeah.
And my braid's like 20-pound.
Yeah.
And I've caught some big fish on it.
Well, and I think when you do have the right equipment, it kind of reminds me of inshore. It's like you're not going to throw a small bucktail or a really small, like a 16th ounce jig head on a medium heavy fast rod. You're going to want something that's got a super soft tip, something that's a light action so that it doesn't totally kill the action of that jig. It's kind of the same thing offshore. But the difference between the rods that are lighter action offshore and the rods that are light action inshore is I think I could break the inshore rods very easily.
You can.
Especially grabbing the tip and blowing up on it. These freaking jig rods have so much backbone and the way that the physics of it, and again I'm an idiot when it comes to this stuff, but the way it's designed to absorb pressure is so well done that you can use light line and light leader and the rod's going to do all the work. It's going to take the brunt of the pressure, not your line, not your knots. It's absorbing into the midsection and the butt section of that rod, not the tip. So it's
and I think it's
amazing.
And it's also the way you fight a fish on slow pitch is once you hook them, you don't really pump or like you just essentially just reel.
Yeah.
I mean, that's all you're doing. You're using it as a winch. So I think that's another reason why you can use the lighter stuff. So
the most fun I've ever had offshore fishing was down in the Keys. We went out to the Marathon Humps, like 30 miles out, and we were trolling. We were, kind of doing a mix of everything. And like, if you've ever been to the humps down in the Keys, like if like blackfin run in the summer, early summer, like June, July, it is a zoo out there. I mean, there's 100+ boats out on some of these areas, and that was the most fun I've ever had jigging. Was spinning. I was using spinning gear. And we just took jigs because like we didn't know what to do with them per se, but like you were like, you got to take jigs. So we took a bunch of jigs and dropped them down basically halfway in the water column, so probably 300 feet. And when you're working that jig, so work it up maybe 100 feet, and then when you get freaking crushed by it, there is nothing like it.
No.
There is nothing
It's
like
so
just getting stopped. You get stopped, and then those tunas take off.
Yeah.
And I mean, a big blackfin is what, 10, 12, 15 pounds?
Yeah.
Like that's a pretty good sized blackfin. The footballs per se. Those things, pound for pound, nothing like it.
They rip. Yeah.
I mean, digging for grouper and bottom fishing, absolute blast.
It's fun, yeah.
But getting like just absolutely wrecked on the way up with a jig,
Yeah.
I mean, there's just nothing like it.
No,
nothing like
definitely not. Yeah, it's super fun, and like that's the nice thing about jigging is you can catch. I mean, like going back to kind of like the live bait and the frozen bait used for red grouper, it's kind of specific with what I use. You can use it for other stuff, of course, but with a jig, you can catch everything. Yeah. You can catch mangroves, you can catch hogfish, you can catch grouper, you can catch kingfish, you can catch literally any species that is swimming down there on a jig because it's doing what those fish do. It's mimicking a bait that's in distress. So you can do it really, really well and have fun with it. I know people that have gone out to the humps too and dropped those freaking jigs all the way to the bottom, which is, I mean, it's crazy. It's so deep. They have like no line on their spool and they'll freaking hook a tuna,
it's
like
600
on the
feet
bottom.
deep. Yeah.
And then they'll have to bring that thing up. So no, it's fun. I love it.
Anything else you want to add in? Because then I have one more question pertaining to this, and then I want to get into the other part of the second half of the thing. Anything else?
No, I don't think so. I think the only thing is be cognizant of what's going on around you offshore, and back to the free line, like pay attention to like what's happening on the top as well as the bottom.
Always have a bait out.
I mean, top. You'll see like weird stuff going on behind the boat. That's not currents. It's probably fish feeding. It's probably sailfish. It's probably wahoo. It's probably kingfish. So you gotta catch them.
So that kind of leads me in.
Yeah.
Probably the thing I love most about offshore fishing is every time I've been out, I see something crazy.
Yeah.
I see something awesome.
Yeah.
What's the coolest / craziest, scariest thing you've seen offshore? What's the craziest experience you have offshore?
So probably when Doug and I went offshore this was last year, and I caught that big sailfish because we were doing exactly what we were talking about. We were fishing for red grouper. I mean, that was the plan of the day. Is we went out to these ledges that we knew had some good fish, and we were red grouper fishing, and we didn't really catch that much. It was interesting because these ledges are 65 to 72 feet, so a good water depth for this area. And we were like, all right, this is what we're going to do. We're going to bottom fish. We were not planning on doing what we were doing, and we pull up, and like the water just looked different. Like just the way that the water was moving was just strange. And then we started seeing mahi jumping. And then we started seeing like...
That's shallow to see mahi too.
And we started seeing these giant kingfish jumping out of the water after these mahi.
It's freaking awesome.
And we didn't have any stinger rigs. So literally we're throwing these baits out the back and just getting absolutely demolished by like these 40-pound kingfish. Yeah. And I'm dropping bucktails and getting them crushed. And we did okay bottom fishing. It wasn't anything wild, but... I'm like, you know what, Doug? I'm going to put one more pinfish out the back. I don't have any wire, and we're just going to see what happens. I pitch this bait out, and literally it hits the water, and the line just starts dumping. And I'm using like a 6,000 twin power and like a tarpon setup. Yeah. And I like could barely close the bail. I flip the bail, and then all of a sudden, like this 6-foot sailfish just starts like walking on the water, and I'm freaking out. I'm like, Doug, it's a sailfish, it's a sailfish. He's like, no, it isn't, it's not. He's like, oh yeah, sure. And he turns around, he's like, holy crap, it's a sailfish. So we're freaking out, we're chasing this thing. It was just wild, and that was probably one of the coolest experiences I've ever had, because like we were so excited, we didn't know what to do. Like he's trying to grab this.
You guys landed it, right?
I have pictures of him holding it. Yeah. He's freaking out. I'm freaking out.
How big was it?
It was
100 pounds?
Maybe not 100, but it was probably
pounds.
Probably 80 pounds. I mean, that's a big sailfish for this area. Yeah. And I mean, we released it, and it was just like the coolest experience that we got to do that together,
Yeah.
But it wasn't the species we were going after.
Oh, definitely.
It was bycatch.
But that's what I love about offshore is there's always something, maybe not to that magnitude, but something crazy like that always tends to happen. Yeah. So same trip, I was down in the Keys, and we're blackfin fishing.
Yeah.
And my dad drops down, and he hooks. He doesn't even realize he's hooked up. But again, it was at one. I mean, we probably caught 30 blackfins in an hour.
Yeah.
I mean, we were exhausted.
Yeah.
And Dad drops down, and he's working his jig back up, and maybe 100 yards off the bow of the boat, he's fishing off the back of the boat.
Yeah.
100 yards off the bow, we start to see a sailfish start jumping.
Yeah.
And it's tail walking. So we think one of the other boats is hooked up. A lot of guys were trolling for blackfins down there, so feathers, cedar plugs, things like that. I'm sure there was other guys jigging, but there was guys just zipping all around. I mean, it's just chaos. And so we start seeing this thing tail walking, and we think, number one, somebody's either hooked up to it, or B, like, I've never seen a sailfish before, so I'm like, maybe this is just how they act.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's sick, or maybe something's chasing it, or whatever the case may be. We do not think that any of us are hooked up to it. Needless to say, my dad is working his bait, and again, we're in 600 feet of water. He was down there pretty good, so his line was literally, he was hooked up. He had lassoed the thing around its face. Did it try to eat it? I would imagine it did.
Yeah.
It wasn't actually hooked. It lassoed around its bottom jaw and its bill, and then it rehooked itself in the line.
Yeah.
So the fish did not have a hook in it at all. So, but the line is essentially U-shaped, and it's down maybe 200 feet deep, and then it's wrapped around this fish, and somehow it stays pinned. So we're like, Dad, I'm pretty sure you're hooked up to this thing. So he's like cranking. Sure enough, he is. We end up landing the fish, probably 50 pounds, 40, 50 pounds, not a big one. Got him a mount, the whole 9 yards. So that's one crazy story. This is the coolest one, though. Probably the third time I'd ever been way out offshore. So I'm with that guy Alan again out on the whaler. There's a bunch of us, probably 12 people. I mean, it was a meat fest, and it was big that day. So we're 65 miles or so. We're at the gas pipelines. So basically, he's got this amberjack spot that's where these two gas lines kind of meet, and we basically just drift that. We were amberjack fishing. It's amberjack season. And I had never caught one, so it's just like the experience of getting wrecked by a
one and done
is awesome. Oh, it's definitely one and done. When they're 40, 50, 60 pounds, definitely. I mean, there's nothing there's nothing like it. So his dad, older guy, kind of the same kind of guy as Kurt, like will not check his bait off and leaves it down like for like an hour. Well, he hooks up and it's big. It's 5-6 foot seas. We're getting tossed around. People are puking. It was rough. But Alan didn't care. Crazy South African man. That dude's crazy. He doesn't care as long as it's safe. He doesn't mind. So his dad ends up getting this like 30-pound blackfin. It was the biggest blackfin I've ever seen. We thought it was yellowfin. He tells the difference. No, it's blackfin. Whatever. So he gets this thing up to the side of the boat. We're all like hunched over the port side looking at this blackfin in the back. And so again, there's like 12 people all looking at this fish. And as I'm walking, like I pick my head up and I walk away, I can see this like blue streak going back and forth, maybe 50 feet off the back of the boat within casting distance. It's a blue marlin, giant blue marlin, easily 500 pounds, easily. This thing was 10, 12 feet long, every bit of it.
It's freaking unit.
It had followed this blackfin, and this blackfin was bleeding. And he hooked it on a bottom rig. Biggest blackfin, by the way, I've ever seen. And this thing was just darting back and forth. It was all lit up. The water was beautiful, but again, the waves were big. It was rollers out there. But just seeing... I mean, again, that's the kind of stuff that, like, you at the start of the day, you cannot predict you're going to see anything like that. You know that you're going to see something cool. You're going to see like a square grouper. You're going to see, dead bird, a freaking whale, whatever the case may be. But to see, by my standards, a giant for the Gulf blue marlin, all lit up. I mean, there's something to see a blue marlin on TV,
Yeah.
and then to see one in a boat where it's, you know, it's dead and its colors are gone, but to see one, you know, ready to eat with those bright blue stripes going, oh my gosh, it was just, it was
that's
insane.
wild.
That was the coolest thing.
That's so
That was
cool.
the coolest thing offshore I've ever seen.
Sick.
Anyway.
What else do we know about unknown?
I know a few things about the unknown. Shall we assume the position?
Yes.
So basically, nothing that we talked about has to do with this.
Okay.
You're right. Last time we talked about fishing.
Yeah.
And we talked about what lives in the ocean.
Yes.
So I watched a few videos over the weekend, and this is just stuff that like comes up on my YouTube feed anyway.
Yeah.
But disappearances in the national forest.
Yes.
The national forest, basically, of the United States, everything. So it's like a known thing. These are big swaths of land. People go missing every year.
Yeah.
For the most part, they're found. For the most part. So again, a big majority of them are found alive, maybe injured, with a reasonable explanation.
Yeah.
Some of them are found dead.
Yeah.
Reasonable explanation, exposure, animal, whatever the case may be. Many of them over the years have not been found, or they've been found much, much, much later in very strange circumstances.
Yes.
So that being said, obviously, I'm sure you know about the David Paulides, the Missing 411 series, and all of the disappearances
so interesting
that he's investigated, and some of the similarities that he's put together. He's basically a detective, or he's a retired detective.
Yeah.
So, but that being said, there is some weird things going on in these giant swaths of land. So I think we get into a little bit of the history of why the national forests are what they are, who started it, basically who protected it, and then some of the crazy reasons of why they may or may not exist in the forms that they do. So, little background. You want to give a little background on the national forest?
Yeah.
land?
So let's do it. So a great man by the name of Teddy Roosevelt, which is Theodore, a Rough Rider in the Spanish War. He also this was another interesting fact. He used to put together boxing. He had a boxing ring in the Oval Office that he would fight people. He would literally he would fist fight people in the Oval Office. He was a
larger
beast.
than life.
Yeah. He said, what was his saying? Speak softly but carry a big stick. Like, that was that man. So this gentleman who was a outdoorsman, he was a hunter. He was really he loved taking care of land and the outdoors and animals. So during his time as presidency, he started the national parks. Yeah. All the national parks pretty much that are in the country today were started because of him.
All of the national forests, especially out west, he created that.
Yosemite, Yellowstone.
So really, Teddy was the first green president per se, but not one of these crazy ones that wants to, these greens. He just wanted to protect areas of the United States that were crazy wild places from development. Yeah. It really is what it came down to.
Yeah.
He loved the outdoors.
He did. He truly did. Yeah. And it's interesting too when like people nowadays talk about that, like hunters, like, oh, you guys hate the outdoors. No, like we love the outdoors, and he is the perfect example of that. I mean, without him, we wouldn't have
hunters
all of these
do more
parks.
For conservation. Private hunters and private organizations that are about conservation do more for the environment than anybody else on the face of the earth.
For sure. Yeah.
So it's why would common sense people look? Hunting is not bad. Hunting is not wrong. No. I love deer.
Illegal hunting, poaching is bad.
Well, 100%. But I'm saying hunting inside the correct terms and laws. And again, I do think that FWC, National Park Services, and the agencies that deal with that, I do think they, for the most part, have that interest in mind of sustainability, and I think most good hunters are that way. Yeah. And they want to be able to continue to do what they love too for generations and teach their kids, and then their kids. They want to carry it on. So
yeah, of course.
I think for the most part, people are that way. And I think even though Teddy Roosevelt killed hundreds, if not thousands, of animals all over the world, and wrote books, he was a scientist too. So he wrote all of these books about his different experiences in Africa. He wrote about bird nesting habits, and he went out and would spend huge amounts of time with huge amounts of people with him, and equipment and gear, and people following him just to go out and study and hunt and just be in the outdoors. He was a man that truly loved the outdoors. So it kind of makes sense that he would find these giant pieces of land per se and just say, you know what an incredible place. I want to make sure that forever, basically, that this remains like it is today.
Yeah.
So has game populations decreased? Of course it has. Have things happened? Have things moved around? Of course it has.
Yeah.
Like it's going to happen. It's going to continue to get worse, and then their season's going to get better, and it's just it's a cycle. It goes up and down. But so basically, yeah, Teddy Roosevelt started the national parks.
But why?
Well, so we'll get there.
Yeah.
We'll get there. Some of these disappearance stories are crazy to me, and
they're weird.
Some of what it's chalked up to is crazy to me. So you had a theory about why Teddy started the national forest, or the deal that he this one's hilarious.
Okay, so like you were saying, there are a lot of similarities with all of the people that were abducted are missing in all of these stories. Sometimes they're not even missing. Sometimes, like you were saying, they are found later, and they're found like, take it for instance, like a lot of the stories are young kids.
Yeah.
They'll go missing, and then the next day they're found 30 miles in another location. And it's not like 30 miles flat land.
Yeah.
It's like 30 miles of like mountainous, like things that like that experienced
that you cannot
hikers couldn't even traverse.
It's physically impossible.
But so the similarities between a lot of the missing people that were never found are German nationality, blonde hair, blue eyes, and they all essentially came from the same lineage. Okay, why is this?
I don't know, man. Nazis.
Because this is why they all gone missing. Is when this happened, we also were starting to get contact with a certain other species, extraterrestrials, aliens. Teddy Roosevelt struck up a deal with these aliens that said, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to get some of your technology. You guys can give us some of this, and you guys can still operate and take people for study.
Research
purposes. But it has to be within these areas. And that's why he created the national parks, so nobody would essentially like jicky jack and like be like, what's going on here? Oh, it's a bear. It's blah, blah, blah. These are the areas that they can do it. They can still do their studies on people, but it has to be Germans, blonde hair, blue eyes, and you can still operate, but we're going to make these national parks.
All right, here's where the cracks in that theory come in.
There's no cracks.
Okay, here's where the cracks in that theory come in for me. Why would we have to make a deal with aliens?
Because we got their technology.
But why would we have to?
Because we don't want
them. They can do whatever they want. So why? Let me. What I'm saying is what bargaining chip do we have that they don't already have? So what would we say to these things like, hey, if you don't operate by what we're saying, we're going to do, what can we do?
Well, it's funny you mentioned that. So we've had other contact with aliens prior to this in the 1800s, just like Dr. Stephen Greer said.
Oh, he's got
the documents. I have the documentation, 7 terabytes.
Of documentation.
We've had technology from them before this, so we have these weapons to take them down, and they're a little scared of us. So they're like, all right, we're not going to mess around. We'll stay, we'll stay in our lane. Don't shoot us down. Don't mess with us. You can have some of our stuff, but let us take a few people, every once in a while. But it has to be out of these parks.
And we basically had like a great deal maker, like another Trump back in the day. He was kind of like Trump back in the day, but maybe a little more loved.
Yeah.
I think he's just misunderstood.
Yeah.
But so basically he said, you can continue to take a few people here and there, but it has to be done.
Yeah.
Basically like away from civilization. So a lot of these areas, like how big are some of these parks are like millions of acres.
Yeah.
Like Yosemite's giant.
Yeah.
The Rocky Mountains, huge. So yeah, the missing 411 stuff though, like some of the similarities are, a lot of them, yes, are children.
Mm-hmm.
Most of them have no memory or very little memory of what actually happened in that short time span. So at least the ones that are found.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them, this is the crazy part, or one of the crazy things. So say there was a guy that disappeared in, I think in the Crazy Mountains, which is in Idaho.
Mm-hmm.
He was elk hunting. He was with 2 other guys. He was supposedly like on a drug detox while he was out there as well. So he was like a drug addict and alcoholic, and he went on this hunting trip basically to try and get clean, basically, per se. But he kind of went off on his own, told him he had like this cache of like camp equipment and food and stuff, that in case he was out and he was going to stay out longer than he needed to be, he was going to go basically to this cache and camp there for the night and then meet him back where he was. But disappears. Nobody literally finds a trace of this guy. His name is Aaron something or the other, but it's a good story. Mr. Bowen does a story about it too, about this guy. But basically, years later, okay, again, no traces of this guy are found. So they search, obviously, they have their ways of searching and like grid patterns and stuff to try and find basically wherever this guy said he was going to be. He's found miles away, basically right on the border of the public land, of the Crazy Mountains, and this farmer's land. And he's found basically his remains, what's left of them. And again, this is years later, and they find his stuff, like his backpack, his wallet with his identification. They find his boots with no bones in them, by the way. And they basically find his skull about 30 feet away. So they think like, hey, at this point, like something small's been messing with it. But anyway, so that's like one instance where they literally didn't find a shred of evidence for years, and then everything, but there was still a bunch of stuff missing that he had with him. And again, they looked in this area that he was supposed to be in, and they didn't find anything. I say that to say there's a lot of other stories where the people go missing. They search the area that they've been known to be missing in, and then they don't find anything. Years later, some random hikers or some hunters come across the remains, the stuff, something, a clue to say, hey, this person died here. It's already areas that have been searched multiple times. Yeah. Stuff where, and it's like in the open. It's not like buried underground or something's dragged it off or whatever. Like it's, hey, we looked in this area at this date and we looked again at this date, and like there's nothing there. So foul play. A lot of the missing 411 people too, they're missing their shoes.
Interesting.
Yeah, so their shoes are gone. A lot of people chalk that up to, well, a lot of these areas when they get cold, when you get frostbite and hypothermia, your body goes into, and I don't know the term of it, but your body, basically before you die of hypothermia, your body tells itself that it's superheated. Yeah. So you take all your clothes off. They call it paradoxical undressing is what it's called. So the people paradoxically undress. And then, so like the Nahanni thing, the Nahanni Valley, you know, up in the great Northwest Territories. Yeah. So then there's a valley of headless men up there, and like all of these missing people that have gold prospectors and whatever, they just wind up missing their heads. But like there's no violent tribes of Indians up there. So it's like, was there serial killers? That's another thing. There was a case in Georgia years ago, southern part of Georgia, Chattahoochee National Forest, which makes up a lot of different areas of Georgia. It's not just one big forest. It's like there's patches of it here, there's patches of it here, and it's either Oconee or it's whatever, Chattahoochee National Forest. And there was a serial killer that was out there, killed a bunch of people in Georgia. So that's like another place. Basically, the national forests are big wild landscapes where you can get away with a lot. There's another Teddy Roosevelt theory.
Let's hear it.
About the national forests. So obviously underground, it's all rock, right? There's a lot of caves. Supposedly, originally, theoretically, all these caves are connected somehow. Basically, there's a world underground.
Hollow Earth.
Hollow Earth theory.
Hollow Earth.
Yep,
See?
Your Hollow Earth
it's
theory.
real.
So basically, these creatures, take Bigfoots, Yetis, Skinwalkers. What's the other one? Starts with like an S. Not an S, but the I don't know, like ghouls and goblins. Let's just say all of these creatures from lore,
ghouls,
that the Indians have supposedly seen, that they really exist, and that they live underground. They only come out to
makes sense.
Take victims certain times a year, certain anomalies in the environment, whatever, and that basically we protected this land. When I say we, I mean Teddy Roosevelt. Protected this land so that these things can still exist. They have to exist in a certain area. We basically push them underground. And it's not like these are like intelligent beings that we're like having meetings with per se. It's more like, no, like we're going to, like there's 1,000 armed men here and we're going to, we're shooting at you. You need to, like, they learn to live underground basically. They used to roam whatever years ago before people were going in and out of these parks and these areas. And that the people that go missing in the national parks are just like he couldn't come out and say, well, this is the reason we created the national parks because there's these beings and these creatures that live there. It's like, no, it's like, well, we're just going to say that we did it to protect the land. And if people go missing and get eaten by these things or kidnapped by these things or whatever, they're just casualties per se. It's going to happen every once in a while, and it's just casualties.
Yeah.
And then they're going to be chalked up to missing persons.
Yeah.
Whatever. They're just going to disappear without a trace. Nobody's ever going to find anything.
And he did this just because he's an outdoorsman and he cares about animals, and he wanted to keep these beings safe because he likes other animals.
I don't know if he wanted to keep it safe or he wanted to keep it secret. That's the theory. He wanted to keep it secret is what the theory that I heard.
I like that.
The other crazy thing about Teddy was a Bigfoot believer. The other thing about Teddy was a politician, and he was known to, again, very similar to Trump, I feel like his personality was. I think those guys I would be a wallflower in that conversation at dinner
That'd
table.
Have been a good one, yeah.
Freaking cranking cigars, crushing whiskey and talking about, people BSing.
Yeah.
He was well known to call people liars just to their face. And I think that's why he was so liked, because he was president before World War I. Obviously, the things leading up to World War I were stewing, they were brimming. Things in America were not exactly great. We were getting ready to go into the Great Depression. He died just before the Great Depression, 1919, I think. He was a larger than life individual that didn't take people's crap, basically.
Yep.
And it didn't matter who you were, he called you out on it.
Yep.
So he wrote about all this in books, and all these people that would come forward and say that they had crazy experiences in the woods basically call them liars. There was one story where these two grizzly mountain hunters, that, again, this was back in the fur trade days in the 1800s, where these guys would go out for days, weeks, months, sometimes years at a time, getting beaver pelts, feeding themselves off the land. These were just mountain people, guys that went, and they were professional hunters. And this dude ends up, long story short, his partner gets killed, doesn't know how. They feel like they've been tracked by a two-legged bear, is basically what they referred to it as. And this guy never came forward and told this story until he somehow met Teddy Roosevelt, and he asked him basically point blank, after they were talking about hunting and the world of that and what goes into it. And he says he's never told anybody that story. And he told Teddy, basically word for word, what happened. And he wrote it in his book. And he says, this is the only experience that I believe truly happened, and I truly believe that this creature is out there. So that's the other crazy thing about Teddy is all sources say he was a reliable person and a truth guy.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
I believe him.
I believe him too.
Yeah. Yeah, there's some weird stuff going on in the national forest. So, I mean, I think personally either it's aliens abducting people or it's a hollow earth, wendigos and whatnot living down. That's the word. Wendigo. Yeah, that's Wendigo. What it is. Yeah.
Those things are crazy.
They are. Yeah, they are crazy. But Sasquatch and Bigfoot living underneath the national parks, and he's like, I like creatures, so I'm going to keep them safe. And if they steal a child every once in a while, it's not the end of the world.
Have you been to a national park before?
Yeah.
Or a national forest?
I guess, yeah, I've gone through the sequoias and all that, the redwoods. Isn't that a national forest?
Yeah, Redwood National Forest.
There's so I've been there.
Big Sur is another one.
Yep, I've been there, and that was really cool. Those trees are wild.
Yeah.
I've driven through the Everglades, which is a national park.
Yeah.
So I've always wanted to go to Yellowstone and Yosemite. I mean, I've heard that it's
Yellowstone, Pennsylvania.
Yeah, Yellowstone, Pennsylvania, yeah. I've just heard that they're insane.
Yeah.
So I would love to go.
Yeah, I want to go to one too. I've been through Big Sur, been to the Everglades before, been through Appalachia, Apalachicola.
Yeah.
Driven through it just on the road. I've never stopped.
Yeah.
It's pretty much looks exactly the same as everything else.
Yeah.
Have you ever been lost before, in the woods? Where you've truly feared you're not going to find your way out?
Not really, no. No, I mean, I've definitely done some adventuring in the woods around here, and the woods, the preserves that we have, aren't that big. So, I mean, you can only get so lost, I would say. I probably could have gotten completely lost, and there was a few times where, I'm like, all right, where am I going? I got turned around, and I got a little nervous. But then I'm like, okay, I can probably just retrace my steps and find my way out. So
that's the hardest part about here, though.
Yeah.
So I've done plenty of hunting in Florida. You haven't done that much hunting in Florida except for on private land.
Yeah.
Florida, again, this is a blanketed statement. Florida and southern Georgia, southern Alabama, and Mississippi. So areas in the South, I would say, are far harder to navigate than larger areas out west. Again, I could be totally wrong. I've never hunted out west. However, the vegetation here is so thick, the ground is so flat, and there's so much water that trying to find your way when you're walking in just the thickest areas for miles and miles and miles. Out west, all you got to do is go up, and then you can see.
Yeah.
So these mountainous areas, Wyoming, Idaho, Montana, like you get lost, you just start walking up a mountain, and eventually you'll see where you're at.
Yeah.
Here, you think the idea... I got lost deer hunting, I don't know, probably 10 years ago. And the guy I was hunting with had a trail marked. I had never scouted this piece before. He had a tree marked, and he said, hey, just walk in, follow the night tack trail. It was dark when we walked in. Follow the night tack trail in, and then I got 2 marked on the tree. Just jack up that tree and just hunt that spot. Well, I walked in at night, and all I was doing was every once in a while I'd shine my light just to see the night tacks and make sure I was going in the right direction. Well, I thought I had come in from one direction because when I got to the tree that I set up, facing the opposite way of which I came in. So I thought. I wasn't.
Yeah.
So I walked out the complete opposite side of where I was facing because I told myself, hey, just walk out the back way. And again, then once I could see everything, I started walking in the direction I thought I was. Well, eventually, I was lost for about 6 hours.
Yeah.
Okay. I was freaking out.
Yeah, that sucks.
I had no cell phone service until I could get to certain areas, and once I would hit like fences of borders of other pieces of land and stuff, but it's private land, and like I wasn't in trouble at that point, so I couldn't just hop the fence and go find the guy's house of the land that I was. Yeah. So anyway, the hardest part was. I thought to myself, just pick a direction and walk in a straight line.
Yeah.
I thought I was walking in a straight line for hours.
Yeah.
I was just doing circles. Yeah. Because I would keep coming back to the same places, and I'm like, how? I feel like I'm walking in a straight line.
Yeah.
It's so hard to navigate in these woods down here.
For sure.
Even with a compass.
Yeah. Do you feel like you were being hunted by Bigfoot?
No.
Okay.
No.
Are you sure?
I almost shot a dog that day, though.
Oh.
It's bow season. It's hot. You're not allowed to dog hunt during bow season. I think you shouldn't be allowed to deer for dogs anyway, personal preference. And I watched this group of dogs. They all had collars on. They were all the same type of mutt type thing. Yeah. Some old redneck probably breeds these things. And he had dogs out in the woods, and you're not supposed to. And I could hear him crashing through the woods, and I turned around thinking maybe it's deer coming or pigs. And I see these 3 dogs that followed my trail in. And they come around my tree, and they're circling this tree, and I'm like freaking mad. Yeah. Because I'm not going to see anything now. I know it. Now there's dog scent in here. Yeah. These deer know that the dogs are in here. They're not going to come anywhere close to where these dogs are going to be. So I did draw and seriously consider shooting one of these dogs.
Just to get them out of there.
Well, like, it's illegal. It's not. Now, granted, I was young and I was stupid. Like, today I would never do that.
Yeah.
But I also wasn't thinking like, hey, if I kill one of these dogs and this dude hears this thing, he's gonna come in, he's gonna freaking shoot me while I'm sitting in the tree. Because if he's got dogs out here, he's probably gun hunting too. Yeah. So, but I say that to say like, this is not that big of a piece of land where I was hunting. Rich Loam, it's over near Brooksville. Yeah, and it sits pretty high. It's sand hills all in Brooksville, so that's pretty high pieces of land. But that's it. When I finally got back, I got cell phone signal, and I was talking to the guy that I was with, and he's like, listen for my horn. And I just followed the sound of the horn on his truck, and I finally found him, and he was laughing the whole time. Oh, you're an idiot, this and that. And I'm like freaking out because I got lost. I still have like a fear of getting lost when I'm hunting because that rings true. It's like, man, I could just, even though he's like, you could have just picked one direction and walked straight, you would have hit a road eventually. And I'm like, I tried to do that. Yeah. And you get turned around in here. So I don't know. I could see myself getting lost in a national forest, so maybe I don't want to go there.
In millions of acres, and there's Bigfoot and Wendigos.
I'll find a cave, and then I'll look in the cave. I'll never go in a cave, but I'd see one, and then a big hand would just come out and grab me, kill me.
Hey, I mean, they're
do dirty things to me.
Well, hey, you never know. They need to make more of Bigfoots. So
with me,
you got a Bigfoot hybrid baby.
Become his slave.
Yeah. Well, is what it is. So
Bigfoot slave.
Yeah, Bigfoot slave. I think we figured out why Teddy Roosevelt created the parks, though.
Yeah.
I think that
aliens and Wendigos.
Yes, there's a war between the aliens and then a war between, not a war, but just keeping them safe.
The Hollow Earth things.
Yeah, the Hollow Earth and the Bigfoot and stuff like that. He decided, like, hey, we're going to figure this out. and we're going to let everybody win.
Yeah.
And we're going to let the outdoorsmen of America win too by having these beautiful parks. And if a kid gets stolen in the mix,
hey, it happens.
It is what it is.
Hey, it happens. Yeah. Shouldn't have been standing there.
Exactly. Yeah, you shouldn't have been there. So
right. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. Happy New Year.
Have a good day. Yeah, Happy New Year.
Yeah, Happy New Year.
Hey, if you like this, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, leave a comment below. Tell us we're idiots. Tell us we're the smartest people on the face of the earth. Tell us we figured it out.
Yeah.
Tell us we're just completely ridiculous. And anything helps. So we appreciate it. We have a lot of fun doing this. And that would really help our channel out. We want more people to see the crazy, ridiculous, dumb things that we talk about, and maybe get a fishing tip or two here and there.
Yeah.
So, but make sure you like, subscribe, and comment, and hit the notification bell so that every time a new video comes out, you get notified.
Yeah.
See you later.